Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Raheem. Salam. Hello. Peace to you all, and welcome to another episode in this continuing series of the names of God, episode 4, al-Rahman, the all-merciful, the infinite good. There are a variety of ways of thinking about how to define al-Rahman, which I think we'll be talking about in just a moment. It's great to have you back for this continuing series. I'm Adnan Hussein, and I'm delighted to be joined as ever with my colleague and co-host, Dr. Marc Applebaum. Marc, how are you doing?
Great. Excited to jump off the cliff again. Let's see where we go.
Yeah, that's right. But at least we're into something where there are clear descriptors. But, again, there's always wrinkles to these things. So we'll be talking about that. I mentioned that al-Rahman, which is, of course, one of the most frequently used and cited names of God in the Qur'an and in Muslim devotional circles. And it has this sort of preeminent place among the attributive names of God because of that frequency of use, but also because, as we noted in a previous episode when we were following at-Tilimsani's discussion, that there is an important Quranic verse that really establishes the importance or significance of al-Rahman as being a name of God like Allah that you can call upon God. In fact, in Surah al-Isra, which is the 17th chapter of the Quran, verse 110, says, "Call upon God," call upon the infinitely good, whichever you call upon, either Allah or al-Rahman.
Yeah.
To him belong the names most beautiful, or the most beautiful names.
Yeah.
So when we think about its significance and importance, it really can't be overemphasized. It really can't be underemphasized. I mean, so, maybe we should start with just thinking about that word.
Yeah. I mean, even before jumping in, I'll just add to that. Tilimsani tells us that al-Rahman is the only other name besides Allah that refers specifically to the divine essence. That's how he puts it. So, so great. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, that's right. Relates to the divine essence and encompasses all the other names somehow, right?
That's
This
right.
is like one of the claims that he made when we were talking about Allah in our last episode. And also, I think it's worth noting that it's a kind of distinctive usage. You don't find it being used to describe human mercy. So we'll be talking in another episode down the line, the other name of God that is closely paired with al-Rahman, al-Raheem, which comes from the same root, which we're going to discuss in a moment, which also might mean most compassionate or most merciful as well. That is an attribute in that adjectival form that can be used for human beings, but for some reason, which maybe we'll think about or explore, it is simply never applied as a descriptor of human beings. It is reserved very specifically only for calling upon the divine, just as the verse seemed to suggest. You can call upon Allah, you can call upon al-Rahman, because these are specific to and unique to the divine essence, as you were pointing out. So what does this word mean? And let's think about this interesting aspect that it is both functioning in some ways as a proper noun, a name, in that kind of narrow sense upon which to call God and call upon God, and at the same time it does describe an attribute, a characteristic, a set of a quality, ar-Rahman, which
Yeah.
comes from the root ar-Raham. Rahama is like many of the languages of the Near East, Semitic languages, Arabic. Many Arabic words, most Arabic words derive from three-letter roots, as
Yeah.
we maybe mentioned before. And this one, Rahama, Rahman and Rahim are both derived from this same root word.
Yeah, and the reference to the womb is right there, along with the root. If you want to talk a bit about that, because I think that it's so close to the span of this word, from its linguistic piece to how it's described by Ghazali and the Sufis, is vast. Everything from the origin of the individual human being, if we're thinking about womb, all of our origins, where the womb that we came out of, that we emerged from, that we were held in, to the giving birth, so to speak, of all of the cosmos through the Rahman, which is where we get to in Tlemceni. So,
Right,
please.
that's right. So it's kind of like the universe is a cosmic womb, as it were, in which existence and life, is ushered forth, from and is there, and also, of course, it refers to the specific, womb,
Yeah.
and so there is that kind of maternal component to the universe as a nurturing, fostering life with, and this is why it seemed that it was relationally important that all existent names, all the names that posit existence, in some
Yeah.
ways, according to Tlemceni, are
Yeah.
connected with this Rahman, ar-Rahman, because of the way in which all existence is somehow partaking in mercy, in the fact of existence is seen as somehow a
Yeah.
mercy.
Mercy, compassion, tenderness, tenderhearted. These are all associations, right, with Rahman, with the word Rahman. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
what for rahma, for mercy, which is
Yeah.
kind of the verbal noun, not
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
description of an attribute. But um, that reminds me that if we're talking about this kind of cosmic sense, there are a couple of verses in the Quran
Mm.
that are relevant to this cosmic idea of mercy being written in somehow in
Mm-hmm.
the fabric of existence, particularly in the verses from, I think it's Surah Al-A'raf, the Heights, the sixth Surah, verse 12, and then repeated again, verse 54. There is a very curious statement about rahma, mercy, that relates to any of these two, you could say, relates to any of these two names, ar-Rahman and Rahim, but really
Mm-hmm.
signals in some ways to me the way in which it's coterminous with Allah, and maybe giving some sense of the logic of being able to call upon ar-Rahman with Allah when praying to the divine or calling upon the divine.
Mm.
And that is that in two occasions, we're instructed in the Quran to say and to describe that God wrote upon himself mercy. Kataba ala nafsihi ar-Rahma. And then in one case, it's Kataba Rabbuka, your Lord, wrote upon himself mercy. And the sense that writing has in this is like the sort of a divine contract, an obligation that you write down, obliging oneself, or it's so
Yeah.
expressive of the divine's relationship to creation as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
that mercy is authorized. And of course, theologically speaking, these concepts about God are always, about how God can't be constrained, right? And there are other
Sure.
uh, names that would talk about the might and the power and the sovereignty of God, that are about the limitlessness, about the lack of constraint, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet here it is that the Quran in two places asserts that God has somehow obliged mercy as necessity
Mm.
upon himself. So that kind of suggests the priority in a way of this principle that I
Mm-hmm.
think is quite,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
quite powerful. This idea.
Yeah, and not to jump ahead too fast, but we might imagine, because I think what we're telling people, or what we're beginning to explore with our listeners, is how God could be understood or imagined, or the source of being could be imagined as uh, infinitely merciful, compassionate, tender-hearted, even if we want to think about it that way. And looking around the world, uh, the commitment to to the Rahman that you're just mentioning, even in the Quranic context, we could imagine that as over and against the wrath, right? And so, or wrathful attributes of God or creation or being. So his mercy exceeds his wrath, or his mercy is over and above his wrath. Is theologically is going to be an idea that I imagine we're going to circle back around to more than once as we talk about the names.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we will have to, but it's great that you mentioned that, because that really refers to, I think, two variants of a hadith al-Qudsi, that is a prophetic statement that is
Mm-hmm.
voiced as what God said, like
Right,
Muhammad the prophet relates something that God said
right,
about himself. And yet this isn't in the Quran. It's like,
right.
extra scriptural companion set of texts and reports, but it's voiced as what God says about himself. And
Yeah.
there, I think, two versions of this, and I've seen them quoted somewhat differently in our texts. They're
Mm-hmm.
very similar, but there's slight points of emphasis. But there's one hadith al-Qudsi that is about situating that after the creation,
Mm-hmm.
after God was completed, this creation of the universe, that he wrote in a book, in his book, meaning I don't know, it's kind of a curious phrase, kataba fi kitabihi
Mm-hmm.
ala nafsihi, so wrote in his book
Mm-hmm.
upon himself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's curious, it's a doubling of like where this is being written
Mm-hmm.
on. But this idea that there's a kind of, so I think what's suggested here is something like this archetypal preserved tablet that is mentioned, the Lawh
Right.
al-Mahfuz, where kind of the
Yeah.
words and the speech of God are written, and basically it's like all that has happened, all that will happen, all
Yeah.
that is existing is all kind of in this one moment preserved on the tablet, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And time unfolds, but it's already present in the divine presence on this preserved tablet, as it's called, Lawh
Right.
al-Mahfuz.
Right.
And that kind of idea of the book that God may have is sort of the decision, you might say, of creation and everything that's going to happen. And so it's this universal sort of sense that what is written there is somehow um, the divine decree, right, for existence.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and he says that, um, that he said, "Inna rahmati taghlibu taghlibu ghadabi." So
Mm-hmm.
my mercy prevails, is
Yeah.
overcomes,
Yeah.
my wrath. And in other versions, we have rahmati sabaqat ghadabi. It precedes
Hmm.
my wrath, right? It
Hmm.
comes before. And
Hmm.
so there's interesting different resonances that might mean, but both
Yeah.
suggest priority in both senses of
Yeah.
the word,
Yeah.
right? Coming before, but also being more important, having more significance,
Yeah.
over wrath.
And I think if I may, I think this is really important. For some of you who are following along with us in our discussion of the names, you will already have a background in Islam, and this will be already very familiar. The language that we're using and the references to Quran and Hadith that we're using, and for those who may not be so familiar, the in a way, what we're painting a picture of right now is imagine yourself receiving this message that existence itself or creation has both of these elements in it, mercy and wrath, whatever that means to you, where I'm not going to try to too tightly define. And like I said, I think we're going to be reflecting on this together, Adnan, throughout the names. That creation, meaning the world that you encounter every day, let's just start there, has elements of compassion, tenderness, and wrath in it, and which I imagine anyone, you could relate to this through your personal experience encountering those things in the world. What we're referencing right now is a tradition, a whole host of traditions in Islam and Sufism that circle around this idea that the mercy, which is part of the very creation of all of this cosmos, exceeds the wrathful aspect, no matter how much wrath we encounter. There's this claim. So even if we just hold it in that way, and I'm being a little phenomenological here by framing it this way, this is the picture that we're sort of circling around right now. So this is sort of like a little bit of a slight detour just to sort of frame it for those who may not be as much already in the language that we're using right now. So if you think about the mixture of encountering tenderness, nurturance, compassion in your life, as opposed to wrath, whatever wrath suggests to you, this is part of the territory that we're in about creation right now already, automatically, just by beginning to talk about al-Rahman.
Yeah. And I think, maybe one reason why we may be emphasizing it so much, well, obviously it is emphasized in the tradition and in all the texts we're reading, and the incidence and frequency of ar-Rahman is, cannot be missed. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so obvious. But I think, one other kind of component is just thinking specifically about Islam as a religious tradition and how it's perceived and understood is so often it isn't associated in many people's minds in the West, in our audience, with
Mm.
kind of mercy and love. I mean, it is, you know, often characterized along with, Judaism as a religion of the law. And so it's
Hmm.
about the kind of framing and constraining of human behavior in society according to divine order and will, is how
Yeah.
this is so often seen.
Yeah.
And this other component that is absolutely fundamental is very often de-emphasized in our perceptions, and even, in Muslims' own sense of the religion and how to practice it. It is so much about this sense of how do I act properly, right? And
Mm.
a sense that there's judgment around, how committed I am to performing the good deeds and the worship that I should do, and avoiding, wrong behavior, and so on, and thinking about it very much in those terms,
Hmm.
and being very present in one's mind. And of course, we will talk about all of these other um, attributes and names that do connect with divine, lordship and sovereignty,
Sure.
and so forth. But to really realize how fundamental and what the implications of that are, of how fundamental uh, rahma is, and particularly al-Rahman as a unique descriptor or name for God is in the tradition. That's probably for those who are less familiar with Islam, and even for Muslims who would know that intellectually, but to actually recognize and realize how
Yeah.
significant and present mercy is
Yeah.
in every component of existence.
Yeah. Mercy and, according to the Akbaris who we're talking about, mercy and mercy as love, as loving. And, this is maybe a moment to share a very short passage of Ibn al-Arabi, because like you said, I mean, even if one is, um, has a deep Islamic background, this particular source might be entirely new to you. And so let me just read briefly. This is Ibn al-Arabi. And in among the Akbarians, Rahman, the dynamic outpouring of Rahman in creating the universe is called the nafsa Rahman, so the breath of the merciful. This is the reason I'm going to read this. So Ibn Arabi wrote, the root of this breath, the nafsa Rahman, is the property of love. Love has a movement within the lover, while breath is a movement of yearning, shauq, toward the object of love. And through that breathing, enjoyment is experienced. And God has said, as has been reported, I was a treasure, but was not known, so I loved to be known. Through this love, breathing takes place, so the breath becomes manifest. So this gives you the flavor of the Rahman as a loving breath pouring out that gives being, according to the Akbaris, bestows being on every existent.
Wow, that is really beautiful and touching. And there's so many resonances also with the word nafs, being both the self and the breath. And
Mm-hmm.
we had, kataba ala nafsi,
Mm-hmm.
nafsihi,
Mm-hmm.
written
Yeah.
upon himself, but what exactly? Maybe upon the breath of the merciful. Like there may be a reason why that formulation of the breath of the merciful, or I think Tilimsani put it, an-nafs ar-Rahmani,
Mm-hmm.
right? The merciful breath,
Yeah.
the most
Yeah.
merciful breath.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's very hardwired in the
Mm-hmm.
unfolding of existence. This kind of sensibility, but I
Mm-hmm.
also think that that's so important. I think we've mentioned that kanzun khafi, as a hidden treasure.
Mm-hmm.
Hadith al-Qudsi, that statement again, a
Right.
prophetic hadith, but it's a description about God's words about himself, about God's self, in that that is, in some sense, at the root of this whole project of the divine names, is
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that there is a treasury to be discovered,
Yeah.
and it's not just that we want to know it, but God wants to be known, right? Okay, so there's a
Yeah.
dialectical kind of relationship somehow in this, in the fulfillment of the human, is somehow coming to know this treasury that's hidden, right? And
Yeah.
of course, to know oneself is to know one's Lord. So we know that that's also another one of these dicta that uh, really grounds the project of the divine names
Yeah.
that we're embarking on, is because how can we know what that treasure, that hidden treasure is? One way is, of course, to approach them through an understanding, an engagement, a reflection, or use of the 99 names. That would be a,
Mm-hmm.
a kind of pathway
Mm-hmm.
uh, into this. And that's, I guess you could say, one of the rationales for the 99 names as a road to travel, a spiritual path.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah. And I think again, like for those of our listeners who are not familiar with some of our references, this is a famous expression that Ibn Arabi loves to mention. It's disputed in terms of its origins, but for him, it's reliable that this hadith Qudsi, that meaning an expression in which, so to speak, God is talking and saying, "I was a hidden treasure and loved to be known, so I created a creation that I might be known." Some paraphrase, but that's fairly close. So again, the picture that's being painted in that tradition is that all of this that exists has been created for that purpose and out of that loving to be known.
yeah, yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Well, I'm thinking maybe we should explore a little bit about how some of our commentators may have
Sure.
reflected on
Great.
this attribute. And of course, we've been referring to the fact that they are very aware of the same verses from the Quran that establish Rahman as a name you can call upon God through, that it has unique characteristics that are like the name Allah.
Mm-hmm.
But just thinking of al-Ghazali, he was very conscious that there might be different levels because this idea of mercy, um, could be shared with human characteristics, and
Mm-hmm.
how to think about that relationship
Yeah.
between the two. He began with a kind of definition that suggests that there are two kinds of, well, that it's responding to a need with a kind of desire to fulfill the needs of the other, right? The
Mm-hmm.
one who is really in need. And
Mm-hmm.
these needs could be almost anything that we could imagine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that there are two kinds. One is perfect rahmah, perfect mercy, which is pouring out goodness or benefaction and support to those in need.
Mm-hmm.
And then, which is, rahmat tamma, and inclusive or general mercy, which is rahma amma,
Mm-hmm.
which is being this kind of generous, loving, and empathetic to deserving and undeserving alike, right? Is that that's not really the crucial question, is whether somebody is deserving or not, but having this kind of quality and characteristic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and It's interesting because he wanted to distinguish between a kind of sense of altruism that might be in an empathetic being,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the desire to support and help others and meet their needs might possibly come from the feeling of wanting to relieve oneself of the discomfort of feeling this sadness or empathy for the other. And so to do something good might be, altruistic in this sense, but also be uh, individually implicated, right? You might have a reason, which is a kind of interesting problematic that he's set up, is that,
Mm.
you might suffer from
Uh-huh.
seeing others suffer. And to
Sure.
overcome that suffering, you might
Sure.
help others. And that is actually also to help yourself. And that
Mm-hmm.
was a very human component. That's the
Yeah.
component at which the human exists. And perfect mercy was doing so almost in this objective sort of way that didn't partly, I think, because he didn't want to theologically
Hmm.
incorporate an idea that God feels the pain of others' suffering in an
Mm.
emotional sort of way.
Mm.
And, so he was trying to think through that. And I think he suggested that there is a kind of like objective, kind of perfect, this is the perfect mercy, is that it fulfills the needs without it being a problem that solves one's own suffering, that in seeing and in empathizing with others.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So for Ghazali, then, does it seem to you that the reason the second one is more perfect, it's more complete, I
Well,
guess?
no, the first one was, well, yeah, I
How did
probably
you put it?
reversed the orders, but yes, okay. You're right. The second is more complete in
Well,
this.
the one that is more complete doesn't even have a reference to one's own needs. It's just the acting out of uh,
The principle
the principle of it.
of mercy, of
Mm.
expressing,
Mm.
you know, the willingness to do good, right? To be good
Yeah,
without fulfilling any need that one has,
yeah,
or to relieve
yeah.
yourself of the suffering of witnessing others suffer, and by
Well,
empathizing,
yeah.
feeling that suffering.
So is he critical of the other of that then, or is it just that one is just a more direct manifestation of unconditioned mercy? Like, how do you
I don't
see
think
him as?
he hierarchizes them,
Yeah.
other than to say that they are different levels. One is appropriate to the divine, and the
Ah, okay.
other has a share. The human has more of a
Okay.
share in it. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
So he cuts us a break then. So it's okay that
Yeah.
it's
It's okay for us
so to
to
be
make him
human
feel
is to be
better too.
involved. Huh?
Yeah. I mean, it's okay for us to feel better about doing good.
Well,
Um,
I mean, another way to look at it, this is maybe a little more psychological, is that uh, we're humanizing ourselves by being human in relation to each other. So it goes both ways at the same time. So this is why I was asking whether he seemed to rank them in a way that was, skeptic, a little, took one down a notch. But I don't get it that way. It sounds really like he's granting when we are nurturing or compassionate toward others, we're simultaneously fulfilling something in ourselves by being in relation to the other, is what that sounds like. Does that fit how
yeah.
you're reading him? Okay.
I think so. I think so. That's interesting. I mean, that's another kind of development on the point that I think he was making. What it made me think about
Mm.
uh, with him was the idea that, well, it related to a point I remember from in the Quran. There's a statement, a kind of prayerful statement seeking for forgiveness, and it's situated with Adam and Hawa at the moment when they've transgressed
Mm.
the prohibition from eating from a certain fruit from a certain tree,
Yeah.
uh, and they're ashamed of this, and they seek forgiveness and turn to God as an example of pure tauba, turning towards God in
Yeah.
seeking forgiveness. And they say, "Rabbana zalamna anfusana wa in lam taghfir lana lanakunanna min al-khasirin." Oh God, we have oppressed or wronged or harmed ourselves,
Yeah.
and if you don't forgive us, then we will be the losers, right? So
Yeah.
there's some
Yeah.
thing where like the transgression is not against God, as like in point of fact, it was the
Yeah.
prohibition was made, but the actual reality of the experience of it for them, as they express, is
Yeah.
that we have done something terrible to ourselves,
Yeah.
that's spiritually damaging and
Yeah.
dangerous,
Yeah.
and we need to depend on God's mercy, or on this
Mhm.
kind of characteristic of mercy,
Yeah.
in order to repair that
Yeah.
spiritual damage and harm.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we will be in a state of loss, like
Right.
loss And that's also another kind of component of this, it seems to me, is that
Yeah.
there's a lot of discussion about the absence. Maybe this is somewhere we could go about certain approaches psychologically to spiritual traditions, and in fact, specifically the divine names. The idea that the absence,
Mm.
the soul is absent in this worldly condition, feels the absence of the divine, and therefore suffers, right, all of these issues or problems
Yeah.
as a result.
Yeah.
Um, but that's not necessarily the only way to kind of think about this relationship. That it's also absence from oneself in
That's
some
right.
sense.
It's
Yeah,
both. And I think like, yeah, I think the the psychological principle, if we want to put it that way, in there could be expressed like, um, if I withhold myself, if I'm locked inside of myself, if I withhold myself from relating in a compassionate way toward you, if I act just selfishly, impulsively, whatever it may be, I'm wronging both of us at the same time. Actually, I mean, between us and our relationship, I'm doing you a disservice, right? I'm withholding something that in good faith as a human being I ought to be there for you in that way, and I'm also I'm also, how to put this, like damaging myself by reducing what I am as a human being,
right.
right? And in both of those things, I'm cutting myself off from my source. So if we want to think about the third in this relationship as the real or God or being, then if I'm locked into selfishly into myself, I'm cutting myself off from you and my actions in the world. I'm making myself more cut off as a human being, and I'm cutting myself off from transcendence and from my source that way at the same time. It's anti-relationship in both directions at the same time, you could say.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, yeah, no, this is really resonant for me, of the fact that if we go back into the etymology of raham, and the
Yeah,
um, root word, is that a number of variants or derivatives of that root, even in this kind of first form, not like elaborated form, but the basic root is about propinquity, connection, and relation, and it's
mm,
almost
yeah,
used as a, obviously because of the idea that those from the womb have
right, right,
connection and relation to one another in their origin, in their
right.
birth. And of course, that is a broader possibility and abstraction of connection and relation
Yeah,
being established in the more cosmic kind of sense that we had been
that's right.
speaking about. So when you were talking about those sorts of relation, it seemed to come back to the very root of the name.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
in
great.
some ways.
Yeah, closeness and distance. This is right there, and it's that language is throughout the Quran as well as Sufism, as we know. Like, am I distant? Am I cut off? Or am I seeking proximity,
Mhm.
closeness? You know?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Well, that itself also reminds me of another passage in this discussion that Al-Ghazali has in his book on the commentary on the meaning of the names,
Mm-hmm.
which was because he was distinguishing between these different levels or ways in which there might be an exclusively divine, divine sort of meaning of al-Rahman, and
Yeah.
where the humans share in the name might come. And because he associates al-Rahman and al-Raheem, which we
Mm-hmm.
haven't discussed and we will discuss, but it's so
Yeah.
intimately connected, he actually combines his discussion there
Mm-hmm.
together because they come from the same root word.
Right.
And they're also so closely connected in the formula at the beginning of all of the every passage or every chapter of the Quran, but one, which
Mm.
has the same phrase later in the chapter, but just not at the beginning. Begins with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate, or the most beneficent, the most merciful. But and very often when they're translated into English, we find that they're almost synonyms, and some people prefer one to be the merciful and one to be, the beneficent, but they're very close in meanings. He combines his discussion of the two. But he does have an interesting passage where he tries to find what is the human share in this very uniquely divine al-Rahman kind of name. And he says that the human share in the name al-Rahman is that the worshiper or the servant or the human, right, show mercy to the ghafilin, the neglectful or the heedless, or we could even say forgetful, those who are in a state of lack of remembrance, lack of that real divine connection, and as a result they behave or act in ways that are outside of that connection, and that you should have mercy, show mercy to them by trying to call them back through exhortation, turn them back towards God by way of gentleness, and not by unf, violence or force, but by way of gentleness. You should try and call them back and look at them with the eye of mercy, ayn al-Rahman, and not of contempt.
Nice.
Because you have to understand and think about every insubordination to God's will or thing that puts you in conflict with the righteous sort of behavior in this world is your own misfortune. It is a misfortune for you. You should feel that somebody's insubordination, as it were, to God's will is a misfortune to you. And you should spare no effort to eliminate that to the extent that the person can be, that your concern is that they might be exposed to God's wrath, right? And but even better, removed from proximity to him. So just meant about proximity, because that is the truly awful state, is to be far. And the actions that you do, if they don't bring you towards God, but in fact actually take you away from God, that actually, just as Adam and Eve, recognized in that Quranic verse, is a harm to themselves. And so the merciful among the human beings, the al-Rahman characteristic is when they take on that feeling of care and solicitude and mercy for others, that they not be deprived of nearness to God. And that's actually a kind of divine, you could say. The reason why that's, I think, the way he talks about it is because that's sort of the place that the divine being or essence would have to the human. And so you, by being merciful in this way, are in some sense creating and inhabiting as a human being, the divine role of mercy to others in creation by being concerned about their relationship to God, i.e. their relationship to really fulfilling their spiritual. I thought that was just fascinating that he would think about it in that way, that the most transcendent, like we had when we were discussing the divine name Allah. I was quite surprised in our last episode when investigating this that al-Ghazali would actually talk about and discuss as a goal or as a realizable process to Allah, that is, taking on in some sense the divine essence, right? It's like to try and embody in a way the meaning of this most unique divine name, that there still was a
Yeah.
human relationship to that wasn't, that got beyond the divide between the human and the divine in some respect. And it seems again here he's worked through some way of trying to explore how the human being can take on a Rahman. And in
Yeah.
this case, it is by having the care and solicitude of the human's relationship to the divine, and trying to be merciful and concerned about others, that they also have this proper relationship. I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
his sense of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, if we take seriously the idea of in the Abrahamic traditions of the human being created in a divine form in the Surah, uh, then these by getting into the names as we're starting to do with Rahman, somehow fulfilling as best we can that attribute would have to be essential to the greater completion of this life that we've got with each other, right? Because it's
Yeah.
part of our template. I mean, if we take that, if we take this idea of being carrying a kind of a divine form, uh, the Rahman, especially starting, exactly where we did with that word, and all the intimate meanings of being given birth to, and everything that entails about the fragility of the human being and the need for nurturance and the need for mutuality. Well, we're right in the middle of basic ingredients for any kind of functional community right away. So yeah, I think nice to hear about a Ghazali in that light. Yeah,
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 well, I mean, it does raise a question, though. So I don't know if now is the time to come to this. We alluded to the need to think about, um, well, to think about the tension of our lived experience with this
yeah,
idea of cosmic and divine, mercy. Al-Ghazali does define, mercy as when you have the capacity to relieve the pain, the suffering, and fulfill the need of somebody in need, um, to do so is mercy, right? So if this
yeah.
isn't happening, how to understand this? So
Oh,
interestingly,
and
this,
most of the time it's not. I mean, let's be honest. I think
yeah,
the problem of evil is, I think, what we're sneaking up on here, among other things, at least.
yes,
Um,
or that's one way of framing it. Another way is how to explain the place of suffering in
sure.
a world of mercy, right? If God is merciful, why would bad things happen to good people? Why is there suffering in the world by the innocents? I mean, this is such an obvious concern and question that we have to be asking,
Yeah.
at this moment. And interestingly, it was also, of course, one that theologians typically asked as well as a problem. But I found the way it was discussed actually in al-Ghazali very apposite to how, in trying to think about this question of ar-Rahman, I kept feeling like, well, where is ar-Rahman? I mean, right now when I'm looking at what's happening in the world, it just
Right.
seems so hard to
Right.
see it as hardwired into the very nature of the universe. It seems like the nature of the universe is far more painful, brutal. There's evil. I mean, it just reminds me. I mean, it reminds me of the verse actually in Surah Baqarah again. Going back to this, I think this Adamic. Because we're
Yeah.
talking about something core to the human. So
Yeah.
thinking
Yeah. What is it about these human beings?
that's right.
So-called human beings. Let's put it that way.
That's right. Is that, yeah, exactly. I mean, this famous verse in the second chapter of the Quran, the cow, that God says, remember. Well, actually, it's remember. when your Lord said to the angels,
Yeah.
I'm going to place a khalifa, a steward, a deputy,
Yeah.
somebody in a certain kind of authority on earth. And the angels, when announced that this was the case, the angels reply and respond. They say, will you place in it someone who will spread corruption in the earth and shed blood while we glorify you and praise you and proclaim your holiness?
Yeah.
you know and I've talked about this verse in the past, and I often think that maybe the angels were actually quite right about us. I mean, God's response to them is, I know what you do not know, or I know what you know not, right? Um, but interestingly, so there was some purpose, right? There's some purpose that is to be fulfilled by the human being in this world, even though, in fact, actually, what we've done is spread actually quite a lot of corruption, pollution, chaos, disorder, shed blood. I mean, um, and actually, God doesn't deny that the angels are
Right.
what the angels say will do. Just
Right.
says, I know what you know not. And it's been a mystery to me always. What is
Yeah.
it that one could know about us when we seem to lack the basic sense of mercy?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, I think you're right to point out that in the Qur'anic story, God does not respond by saying no. The humans aren't going to do that. That's not the response at all. Nor are we told what it is that he knows that the angels don't know. It's left open, right?
right.
Um, and I think that the at least there's this element, I think, both in Quran and in the Torah that differently. There's a quite a dark picture that's embedded in both of those both stories. I went back to Genesis before we met today to find the line that's sometimes translated. This is right before the flood, right? Uh, where in Genesis, again to paraphrase, God concludes that evil is the imagination of men's hearts. And in fact, even goes further. I think in Genesis, God regrets having created the human being, according to that version. So it's a different story, but both allow for there there being something at least heavy and I would say tragic, even about what's the situation likely to be with these people, meaning us.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
mean,
lest anyone who's following this, we've been in some really lovely places
yes, right.
today, but this is right. But this is not to convey that. No, I'm tempted to bring Freud into this, but that would be a complete left turn. It not to convey that because we're speaking in a genuinely I'll say even reverential way about this tradition that we're inhabiting here, uh, that we have a rosy picture.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
that's not where we're coming from. Yeah,
Right. Because I mean, this is the sort of time and experience, and you could choose almost any period of human history and say that this
yeah,
would be the predominant experience, is that it's life is hard, there's suffering, there's pain, there's
yeah,
evil, there's injustice and oppression. Um, but of course, what we're experiencing and feeling, right now in a very chaotic world, the Gaza genocide, there's been so many times where I have thought, where is the mercy? You know, um, can't there be some relief? And while we're right now in a moment at the time of recording when there's been a putative, ceasefire, we know that the suffering really hasn't ended, and the situation continues to be really terrible and awful. And
yeah,
it's so difficult to really see the mercy in the horrific actions that the angels rightly condemned us for,
Hmm.
playing out in front of us, and not, even in a hidden
Hmm.
way, that um, we're confronted by it all
Yeah.
the time,
Yeah.
very directly. Cannot be ignored or denied if you're at all open to what people are really experiencing in this world and in this life. And one component that I think is so fascinating to me in this is that, from my distant position, feeling that empathy and that pain, and wishing for mercy, feeling whatever I could do, I would, for uh, to
Hmm.
help
Hmm.
ease the suffering of others, in such a way that sometimes it profoundly pushes you to question, how could this, how could Rahman really be at the center of the universe when it's like this? And yet, to see the Palestinians themselves be so firmly committed, um, in many ways, to faith. At least, I know there's Christians as well as Muslims, and I think, uh, their Christian faith has been very important. I've been very,
Hmm.
impressed with the analysis and the kind of spiritual fortitude of somebody like Pastor Munder Ishaq,
Uh-huh.
whose
Yeah.
sermons and his comments have been so profound, insightful, and inspirational.
Yeah.
But I am very familiar also with, of course, the majority, especially in Gaza, of people who call upon that hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil, that their hands, that it's in God's hands, and this kind of patient. I don't see them despairing. I don't see them saying, where is God's mercy? I think maybe they might say, where are our allies, our fellow, Muslims? But they don't feel that God has abandoned them. And to me, this is a total mystery, how one could go through such horrific suffering and feel like, no, you've not been abandoned by God. God is still merciful. And it just reminded me,
Mm.
like, this passage here that Al-Ghazali, you typically, in each of his discussions of the names, he has this three-part structure where he discusses the name in its kind of definitional sense,
Hmm.
then has implications, daqiqa, like subtle points, basically implications of the discussion about the definition,
Hmm.
and then moves to another section called faida, the benefit or lesson that one should take. So kind of now make it more personal for the
Hmm.
seeker, like
Hmm.
how would one really kind of benefit from the discussion that one is that he's had about the divine name, and then counsel, tanbih, counsel, how really then to act in light
Yeah.
of it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he's got this structure. Typically in this chapter he adds another chapter where he says question and its answer, because the question comes to everyone's mind, it seems, and
Hmm.
he's aware of
Right.
this. And it says,
Right.
you might say, what does it mean for him, the Most High, to be merciful, al-Rahman, and to be the most merciful of those who are merciful, arham ar-Rahimin, which is a Qur'anic phrase. So, the most merciful of those who are merciful.
Yeah.
For one who is merciful does not see people afflicted or injured, tormented or sick, without hastening to remove that condition when
Right.
he can do so.
Right.
But the Lord, praise be to him most high, has the power to meet every affliction, to stave off every need and distress, to
Hmm.
eliminate every sickness, and to
Yeah.
remove every harm, even though he leaves his servants to be tried by disasters and hardships, while the world is overflowing with disease, calamities, and tribulations. Yet he
Yeah.
is able to remove them all. So it leaves the question, how can he be merciful
Right.
in the face of all of this,
Right.
with the capacity, theologically speaking, the all powerful, the create, the capacity. So, in what sense can we understand mercy
Right.
as operable in this
Right.
scenario? Which is the question we have.
Yeah. Both with respect to natural, so to speak, natural evils like disease, or moral evils, ethical
That's right.
evils. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Where does he go with that?
Well, okay. This is what's kind of interesting
Yeah.
is that it ends up being quite a long discussion on the problem of theodicy here, but
Hmm.
in the frame of the question of mercy and the merciful, he tries to argue that uh, that there is no evil in existence which does not contain some good within it. And were that evil to be eliminated, the good within it would be nullified, and the final result could be an evil worse than the evil containing the good. And so the
Mm.
example that he gives is the case of gangrenous wound in the hand. Like
Yeah.
amputation of the hand is pretty awful. It seems pretty evil to the one who's suffering it.
Hmm.
But if it's done in order to preserve the body, because the gangrene would then
Yeah.
spread and kill the whole person,
Yeah.
then it is an evil with a good in it, that it is
Yeah.
designed to achieve health. It may
Yeah.
not be the optimal situation, but if you have a gangrenous hand, you'd rather it be amputated so that you remain alive. So if the principle is health, and the kind of suffering act of amputation is
Hmm.
essentially secondary to the goal of achieving
Yeah.
health for the whole body, then it can be acceptable and understood. And so he uses that as a kind of medical example, um, to try and distinguish between what he says, and then he applies actually the dictum, my mercy precedes my anger, is
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
if what is intended for its own sake, takes precedent over that which is intended for the sake of the other. So in its own sake is health. And in this case, amputation and the pain that it caused is secondarily undertaken, for the sake of the other. So it's secondary. The main principle here is still that
I
you're
get
trying
it.
to preserve health.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
it's does he go on to an interpersonal example? Because I think this is we're talking about social injustice, or the brutality you were mentioning earlier. I think it's harder. I think this is
It
much,
is.
much harder to square.
It is,
I
and
mean,
I think
from one perspective, if we go back to the angels' critique, it's like, if he knows something that they don't know, like it, let's say,
right.
well, it's still just us down here
Hmm.
from one perspective.
Hmm.
The freedom to repeatedly make terrible choices as as masses of human beings, as human communities. Yeah, that's that seems to be what's we would have to frame that as what it makes possible is a human being who's capable of such repeated mistakes, travesties, inhumanities, that there's something growing in the midst of that, at least potentially, that mirrors the divine, and that by in those probably rare cases where we actualize that rahma in ourselves more full than not, that we both humanize and kind of so to speak deify ourselves, take more steps in that direction. But it's not a good bet. I mean, to go back to the angels and
Right.
in the verse, it's definitely not a winning wager, uh, as far as it seems to me, to
Well,
bank on it.
yeah. I mean, that's history. I mean,
Yeah,
history falsifies. I
yeah,
mean,
and
there's plenty of opportunities to see the good in history, but I think you have
yeah,
to recognize that despite all other ways in which we frame the human condition as having encompassed progress, right? There's
Yeah.
always this like sort of sense that human progress, right, has happened over history. And I think all they really mean is that there's been technological progress, because even in the age of democracy, the age of human rights, all of these universalist sorts of principles and ideals that were supposed to mark kind of human cultural, philosophical, and moral development, right? I mean, we still see that, in fact, the modern age is the one that has been most ruthlessly barbaric, violent, and
Yeah.
destructive of both the world and the environment and of other human beings. I mean, every time that people talk about the medieval, a period that I study, it's usually characterized as violent and chaotic, and it
Right.
is nothing like the level of barbarity of our own so-called enlightened age. So this kind of idea of our progress, I mean, on the one hand, I'm very committed to the idea that we have to be striving towards,
Yeah.
with greater knowledge, with greater, capacities and capabilities of meeting the needs of people, that there should be this ideal of mercy, of rahma, of achieving those. And yet we have created so much more suffering. It's so interesting because, again, I mean, this is really trespassing upon
Yeah.
a Raheem in some ways. But because he combines his discussion, it's a very interesting way of trying to think of the two together. It does different inflections of this question of compassion and mercy as divine capacities, divine names, and how the human has a share in it. He
Hmm.
says some very interesting things that I wish we would take on board now. I mean, this is quite stunning
Yeah.
to me. He says the humans share, the worshippers share in al-Raheem, the, um, maybe we could say the most compassionate.
Hmm. Hmm.
Is how one way to translate that divine name,
Hmm.
lies in not turning away from any needy persons without meeting their needs to the extent of one's ability, nor turning from any poor in one's neighborhood or town without committing himself to them and
Yeah.
ridding them of their poverty, either from his own wealth or reputation, which is an
Hmm.
odd sort of notion, but either from his own wealth or reputation, or
Hmm.
by interceding on their behalf with another. And if he is unable to do all that, he should assist them by prayer or by showing grief on account of their need, in
Yeah.
sympathy and love towards them, as though he were thereby sharing in their misfortune and their need. I
Yeah.
mean, this is a social vision of
Oh
that
yeah.
emotional quality.
Yeah.
And to think that this is written, in the 11th century of the Common Era, 11th or 12th century. I can't remember the exact date of it, but
Yeah.
um, we're still nowhere near this kind of ideal, even though
Yeah.
we now actually have the capacity in ways that were unfathomable at the time Al-Ghazali was writing.
Yeah, but
So
we're not much further from our pre-human ancestors. I was going to say monkeys, but that I mean, we're not much further evolutionarily. We're a fraction of a second on the span of history further along. Uh,
well, that's one kind of way people look at it. But I mean, I think one issue is that culture is supposed to be a major factor in overcoming the pure biological, right? Like culture is supposed to um, be something that distinguishes human social development, and yet, despite the
well,
fact that culture has changed a lot in terms of the
yeah,
values, social structures are very different from they were, say, in, uh,
sure,
Mediterranean societies 1,000 years ago. You would think
sure,
that with all those differences that are
yeah,
kind of the ground, the social and cultural ground upon which unique features of human experience would develop, that we would be in a very different sort of place.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're tempting me to bring Freud in.
Uh-oh.
I'm telling you, it's civilization and its discontents. It's such a dark and funny, but dark
Yes. Yes.
view. But I think, I mean, someone who was with us at the beginning of this hour and um, with um, with the nafs al-Rahman might, the outpouring of the breath of the Merciful, uh, and has followed us to this point in the conversation, which is touching on real, I'm just going to say, despair about the human condition, at least the availability to be in touch with despair about the human condition around us. Might be surprised at like how we got here, or was that what you guys were here to talk about? And I would say yes, because the range, I think what you and I are trying to model is the interrelatedness of all these levels of being and relating to the various traditions that we inhabit together. I don't feel like we can leave any of it out, and so that's sort of a word to anyone who may feel like, how did you get here?
You get here from mercy. Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's the perceived absence of it. I mean,
Yeah.
something I did want to,
The evident absence of it. Yeah.
and you might have some further thoughts about how to think about that on like the more psychological level as well. But at this theological level, Al-Ghazali really ends on a very optimistic. I mean, he's quite optimistic. I mean, he thinks the majority may not really understand, and you always have that kind of elite kind of sensibility that not everyone is going to,
This is this is another third rail, I suppose. Is the
it is. I would say.
is the
But at least
elitism.
it allows him to sort of conclude on a positive note, because he
Sure.
says, he says basically, you have to question your reasoning here. That there's two things that you could consider. If a particular evil occurs to you without your seeing any good beneath it, you should think it possible that a particular good be achieved without its being contained in evil. You should query whether your reasoning might not be deficient in each of these two trains of thought. And he goes through both of them. And one of them, after kind of discussing them, he says, so accuse your reasoning in both these ways, and never doubt that he is the most merciful of the merciful, or that his mercy takes precedence over his anger. And never doubt that the one who intends evil for the sake of evil and not for the sake of good is undeserving of the name of mercy.
Mm-hmm.
Beneath all this lies a secret whose divulgence the shar', that is the revealed law, the shar' prohibits. So be content with prayer, and do not expect that it will be disclosed. Right? You may not know. So it's again the same. God knows what you know not, but you should really have faith. If you're really following this path, you will have faith that God really still is the merciful, the most merciful.
Yeah.
You have been instructed by signs and given directions. So if you're worthy of them, then ponder them. And he quotes a line of poetry. You would have been heard were you calling a living person, but there is no life in the one you call, meaning that the majority won't, necessarily understand this. This is the condition of the majority. But I do not think that you, my brother, speaking to the person, who requested the book, for whom this explanation is intended, lack the capacity to ponder the secret of God, great and glorious in the divine decree. So all these hints and notices are unnecessary for you.
I think I think there's so many big questions that we're touching on, and we'll probably continue to circle around as we continue with the names, Adnan. Yeah. One of them is about that kind of counsel, which in a medieval text makes complete sense to me, that would be the case. Just trust, have faith. And I'm not being dismissive of that, but I think because it was, I think to be maybe more generous, it was trust, but also reflect. So I mean,
Oh yes,
reflection
definitely
is
ponder.
certainly not lacking from that call.
That's right.
But for someone, and there may well be people who are following along with us here, for whom that's the right framework, like that, like the framework of uh, iman, or the framework of trusting deeply, uh, is already by itself sufficient as an answer. For others, the trust would be okay, trust, but trust and reflect and look and see, like what do and somewhere we could go, and maybe we may end up continuing with the same name, is reflecting on the wide range, the continuum of suffering and evils that any one of us could experience. Because one could ask the question, we've gone to some kind of the more, we've alluded to the extremes, but we could also ask questions about the relative evils or the relative suffering that any one of us would have undergone, and ask the question about those: is there mercy in it? And I think that's
Mhm.
worth maybe another whole conversation, because I think that it's so rich. Both it's rich theologically, it's also rich just purely existentially and phenomenologically, to ask that question about suffering, uh, or being the victim of real evil. I think it's worth like continuing the conversation in that direction as well. I guess what I'm getting at is that I think like I would not be satisfied with either a purely theological prescription for this, or a sort of, I don't know, a dryly psychological or philosophical one that didn't speak to lived experience in a way that
Right.
was open to transcendence. Uh, so but I think what I feel like we've broken through to in this conversation is now we're getting into the names that really touch directly on human experience and the lack of experience of certain things, or the almost total absence of certain things in everyday life. So I think we're really getting into rich territory now
I
with this.
agree. I mean, I think we raised sort of the big ultimate and extreme, as you're pointing out, conditions, but there's so much textured experience to explore
Yeah,
between the kind of extreme or in this kind of ultimate sorts of cases. Um, but I think I would be very interested to consider how how one might actually
yeah,
see mercy um, in in more accountable sort of daily sorts
yeah,
of experiences as well, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's possible to ask these ultimate questions when you're dealing with cataclysmic tragedy, and that's useful for reflecting on ultimate concerns. But also, we have to think about how daily life, it's just right now daily
yeah,
life difficult to separate from cataclysm and chaos around, but the way we experience these things is still through the mediated way in which we live, right? So we don't live the um, kind of abstract news and so forth all the time. Like there might be parts of our consciousness that will engage that, but at
yeah,
other times we're still sort of struggling, it seems to me, to really see where in oneself you would find that quality of mercy operating in an
yeah,
effective sort of
yeah.
way.
Well, right. And I mean, I think the way a phenomenological psychologist might ask this question would be something like, have you ever had an experience uh, of being shaken to the core in in what was a terrible way, physically, emotionally, and whatever the way that way is, that later you were grateful for, that later you experienced as something as something which, if we as something that gave you something precious.
Right.
I mean, that would be one way of framing the question. Certainly not the only way, but that's one way to invite you and me, and our listeners, to sort of think about what we're raising about suffering and mercy.
Yeah. And I think maybe
In the
also,
first person, personally.
that's right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
also, just to connect it to Tlemceni as we maybe conclude our conversation, is also with his kind of sense of expansion and contraction, right?
Right.
As just these natural cycles that we go through, periods of real bestowal of, you know, generous and mercy, you know, to others, and then others of this kind of contraction where you're really left with yourself in a spirit of loss or lack or absence, and how to
Yeah.
deal with that, and remember that there is this cycle somehow, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, an Islamic reference to this would be Surah Tin, for example.
Oh.
So,
Yeah.
and we might come to that next time. But
Mhm.
I mean, the idea of the human being being created in a great
Mhm.
or the best form, but
Right.
then being reduced
Ahsani
to
taqweem, and then
yeah.
but falling to asfala safilin, the lowest of the low.
Yeah,
Uh,
and this
yeah.
is their.
Um,
I'm just sort of sticking with the Abrahamic traditions today,
mhm.
but it's their that's their one way or another in all three of the Abrahamic traditions. This idea of just how how low, we what we are, like, what are we?
Well, I
So
think, yeah, I think there will be a chance to kind of come back and circle back to some of these in our next episode. That might be a Rahman and Raheem companion, you know, as we move forward into Raheem, but still thinking about
yeah,
the same topics and issues because they're very closely connected, while exploring
yeah,
some of the specificities of Raheem, al-Raheem. I think that will
sure.
be useful. Yeah, that will be useful.
I would find it, and I have already found it, like, so useful when viewers share comments about where this is landing or not landing. I think we always appreciate that, and obviously we have a very particular sort of mission that's in doing this, that doesn't capture every possible way of approaching the topic. We could be much more systematic than we are, but I think this is a very existential and personal dialogue at the same time. So let us know how we're reaching you or not.
Yeah, that would be helpful to know. I mean, we do appreciate all of the
Yeah.
comments, engagement, and interaction. So do put them in comments in the YouTube video. I don't know if you can leave comments on a podcast. I think not with the audio form, but you can in YouTube, and
Yeah.
you check them and read them, and we appreciate them so much. And listeners and watchers, it's a journey. I hope you're finding your pathway with us. And it won't always coincide and be exactly the same path. And in fact, actually, we're going with the flow. The structure we have is we'll talk about the names. But beyond that, a lot of productive new things happen experientially, which is the approach we want to take in general to thinking about the names, but
Yeah.
also in our own elaboration and discussion of them together with you. So we hope to hear from you, and we look forward to speaking with you, for you, together, Mark and I, in our next episode next month. But until then, we wish you peace with justice and solidarity. Salam, everyone.